put yourself into this story. Who are you in this story? Okay, who is God in this story? When I read Luke chapter 18. One day, Jesus told his disciples a story to show that they should always pray and never give up. There was a judge in a certain city, and he said, who neither feared God nor cared about his people. A widow of the city came to him repeatedly, saying, "Give me justice in this dispute with my enemy." The judge ignored her for a while, but finally he said to himself, "I don't fear God or care about people, but this woman is driving me crazy. I'm going to see that she gets justice because she is wearing me out with her constant requests." Then the Lord said, "Learn a lesson from this unjust judge. Even he rendered a just decision in the end. So don't you think God will surely give justice to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will grant justice to them quickly. But when the Son of Man returns, how many will he find on the earth who have faith?" There's that faith again. I've read this many, many times before, but every time I read it, I just put myself into the woman's character, right? That's who we are. And I feel like that's what you think maybe when you're you're asking God over and over for these prayer requests, is maybe that's how you feel. But that is the complete opposite of who we are. She was poor, powerless, forgotten, abandoned. She had no relationship with the judge. But that's the complete opposite of us. We are rich, full of power, never forgotten, never forsaken. We are his children, and we are heirs. The judge, we put him as God, right? But that's the complete opposite of who God is. The judge was crooked, unfair, disrespectful, uncaring, preoccupied. And God is truth, fair, respectful, caring, always concerned for us, his children. If it is important to us, it is important to God. Now remember, I'm going to close, but your ears perked up now. It's closing. I'm going to close, but I need you, remember the participation. This is where you need to participate, okay? So you guys start thinking, all right? I want to testify of the power of prayer. And I would like to open the floor to staff, to maybe the order students here. If you have a testimony, just real short, of how a prayer has been answered in your life, or in somebody's life that you know. Okay? So think about that. Let me read Revelations, and then I'll give some examples of how God has answered some prayers in my life. Revelations chapter 12, starting in verse 7, says this. Then there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels. And the dragon lost the battle, and he and his angels were forced out of heaven. This great dragon, the ancient serpent, called the devil, or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with his angels. Then I heard a loud voice shouting across the heavens, "It has come at last, salvation and power in the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to earth, the one who accuses them before our God day and night. And they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony." We defeat the enemy by accepting Jesus, the blood of the Lamb, and we also defeat the enemy by our testimony. And I'm going to testify right now about the power of prayer. A few months ago, my back was killing me. It was so sore, to the point where I couldn't even put my shoes and socks on my feet. It was that painful. And I must have been moaning or groaning or something that awoken my wife in the middle of the night. And she said, "Josh, can I pray for you?" And I was probably tired, I don't know. I was hurting really bad, and I said, "Yes, please, please." And she started praying for my back to be healed. And I got out of bed to try to alleviate it. I tried to lay on the floor to try to alleviate it. Nothing was working. I tried to get back onto the bed, like this, and sharp pain shot down my back and into my leg. And I felt like God was telling me to get on your knees. Get on your knees. And I felt like he was forcing me, because I tried to do it my way, try to do everything else by trying to alleviate the pain, that finally I was forced on my knees, and my wife kept praying and praying and praying over an hour, praying, to the point where she thought we were just going to lay here on the floor the whole night long. I eventually was able to get back into bed, and eventually I was able to get a little bit of sleep. And in the morning, I'm texting Mrs. Herzog Jr. and saying, "Jess, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have any lesson plans. I'm going to try to go to school. You try to get me a sub by 10 o'clock, because by 10 o'clock, they have a little bit of a break. It'll be a good transition." She writes back, she says, "Have you talked to our physical therapist from Rhode Island, who just happens to be in town volunteering at Mountain Mission School this week?" I said, "No, I haven't talked to him." He said, she said, "Talk to him. First man I see when I go to school is this man, Jeremy McVeigh." I think it's his name. And he says, "What time are you free?" 10 o'clock. Great. He goes to my classroom. I spend 30 minutes with him, and I feel so much better. I wasn't perfect or anything like that, but I felt so much better spending 30 minutes with this man. Now, most people will say, "Well, that's just a coincidence." There's no coincidence there. Why in the world would this man, who has never been here before, he's from Rhode Island, come here to volunteer in this particular week of the year where my back was killing me? Literally, I couldn't function. And now I'm skydiving. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. A prayer for our guardian angels to protect us. We travel so much around here, and the Lord answers our prayer daily. Our car has broken down at least 3, 4, 5 times. 3 times because our brakes have been out. And 2 of those times our brakes were out while we were here at Mountain Mission School, not on the road somewhere. One time our tire, we got a flat tire, and then when we took it to the shop, the dude said, "Hey, you know your brakes are out too?" I'm like, "No." And they had fixed our brakes as well. Power of prayer for protection. My wife's foot has been ailing her, and she has no pain now. Can you put up the Parker Hall picture? I want to remind you. You've probably seen this before. But this was when the fire had just happened, and Mr. Tyrone, I believe, took this picture. Do you remember that? This is a picture looking from the chapel where the boys were living at that point, Parker 1 and Parker 2, and this is what he saw. Don't forget. Communion meditation. Don't forget. Remember. Answered prayer. A double portion, Parker Hall. The golf tournament that was just held. Double portion. And even to the littlest thing, like God holding back the rain so that we could have a golf tournament. And not just holding back the rain, but putting the clouds to protect us from the sun on that day. Our soccer tournament this past week, we didn't even know that we were going to have a soccer tournament because of the construction and because of guest housing. One family wanted to have a tour after the games, and when we were having the tour, the monsoon came down. Did anybody see that, hear that? The rain just poured down on us. But God held it out just for the tournament to finish. It's a little thing, but it made a huge difference. And that's God, the power of prayer. All right, so if you're not sure what you're going to say right now, I'm going to bring this mic down for you. Remember, you're participating, right? Remember that little part of the sermon? The power of prayer, okay? You want to go first? Put it on the spot.
Am I allowed to say that? Mine is like he said, it's a little thing. I don't need a mic. Lord knows I have a big mouth. But when we were, right before school started back up again, I was telling the girls, I said, guys, there's supposed to be a big meteor shower outside. We're supposed to be able to see all these shooting stars. Guys, come on, we gotta go out, we gotta go out. And so I was getting them all pumped up, and so we went outside after hours. We were sitting on the girls' side, and we were there, gosh, guys, hold on, for like an hour or something like that, and nothing. Nothing. When I say nothing, I say we saw nothing. We saw clouds. It was a really cloudy night, and we saw nothing. And people were starting to kind of get, like, oh, this is probably kind of stupid. And I know, like, Isaiah really wanted to see something. He was getting discouraged and everything. And so Mr. Beery was kind of like, should I just open the hall back up again and take him upstairs? I was like, this was a bust. Oh, well. And so he went over the hall, and a bunch of girls went back upstairs. But Isaiah was really wanting to see a shooting star, and and I was like, I'm just going to hang out with Isaiah a little bit outside out here. And some of the girls chose to stay outside with us. About 4 or 5 girls stayed outside. And so I said, Isaiah, you know what, let's move to a spot where maybe it's a little bit darker on campus. I don't know. And he was like, Mama, can we go stand next to Jesus? And I said, sure, let's go down there. And so we went down, the girls came down with us, and we were just sitting down, and the girls were sitting on the wall, right there, and we were just laying there, just looking, and we were there, I don't know how long we sat there, guys, for what, another 20 minutes or so, maybe, or so, and I was just sitting there, and I'm facing Jesus' statue is in front of me, and then the mountain is right there, so we're looking right above the mountain line in front of us, and I finally said, I just started praying out loud, and I just said, Lord, I know that this is such a little thing, and it's so silly. It's so silly, Lord, I know, but God, we really want to see a shooting star, because we just, BAM! We lost our minds. We went nuts. Okay, was it just me? Did I go crazy? Was it just my, and I was turning to the girls, after I was screaming, I was like, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I went nuts. And I said, girls, was it just me? Was it only me that saw that? No, ma'am, no, ma'am. We saw it. We all saw it. And so to say, back to Mr. Beery's point, God cares about the little things. He loves the little things. He loves to give us a glimpse of his love for us. And he knew, the girls, of course, they were keeping it together way better than Isaiah. He really wanted to see a shooting star. And so just our Papa God, just being so precious and so sweet, that even something like that would be important to him.
I thought this would be that awkward moment where I just... Anybody?
That would be awkward. I did not anticipate coming up here this morning, nor did I anticipate you speaking about 2 verses that I was studying last night, and I truly don't believe in coincidence. And so then my wife taps me like, is there anything that you want to go say that you're praying about? Mr. Beery didn't ask you to ask me, he asked you. So I asked someone, hey, is there anything you want me to pray for? And they told me, and I said, absolutely. And then they asked the same question, hey, is there anything you want me to pray for? And I said, clarity. And I'm always seeking clarity. And when I can't find clarity, I try to figure it out for myself, which is, for us adults, I'm sure we know that's really a bad thing. So, just in my study last night, I got the Zephaniah verse, and then I got the Luke verse, and it just kept talking about faith, 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 faith. And we all know what true faith is, right? Does anybody can we truly describe what it is? It's believing things that are not seen. And I definitely didn't see this moment here. And so again, those verses for me is like God in surround sound. And like I said, I always try to find clarity, but when I'm trying to find clarity, I'm trying to see something clear, and God is telling me, you can't see what I have in store for you. You can't see what I have in store for the school, for your role, whatever the roles are that you have, you can't see it. And so stop trying to have clarity and just have faith. And so, it's kind of, I guess this is confirmation of that prayer. And for those who I asked to pray for me for that clarity, this is confirmation for that. Don't clap for me. Clap for Jesus.
This was from a few years ago, but on Sunday nights when we meet in the dining hall and have our prayer time, it's a different theme, a little bit different each week, but this one particular time, we had been asked to pray for something that only God could answer. It couldn't be with a coincidence or anything. It had to be something clearly that God would answer. And so we were going around the table, and each one of them was praying for some pretty hard things. And that happened to be a year when finances were really tight at Mountain Mission School, and the administration or the board or someone had decided that we would not have a choir tour that year because it was just too expensive, and they were having to cut back everywhere they could. And so Mrs. Rada, who was the president at the time, said, we're not taking a choir tour this year. We might be able to get a couple of long weekends, but no tour. And the kids were real disappointed because that's the big part of the year, that you get to get away for more than a week and get to see sites that you've never seen before. And in this case, it was going to be the Florida tour, and that was even harder to miss. And so we were going around the table, and Robel Ali, who was going to be a senior that year, this was his last chance to take a tour. He said, "Oh, ma'am, I'm going to pray that God lets us have a tour." And I said, wait, don't ask for that. It's already been decided. It's not even up in the air anymore. It is already decided that there's no tour this year. But I'm going to pray for that anyway. And I'm thinking, he's going to be really disappointed, and it's going to hurt his faith and everything when it doesn't happen. So I still tried to talk him out of it, and finally I said, all right, go ahead. So he prayed that God would let the choir take a tour. And I don't know why, but they got to take a tour that year. Lots of things happened, and one thing led to another, and before you know it, they were on their way to Florida. I was pretty amazed.
I would just like to say thank you to the Lord for answering my prayer once in a car accident. It was raining horribly, and my car was headed toward a tree because I lost control. And I could just remember in driver's ed, the video we watched in school where they tried to scare us. And they said, if you hit a tree in your car, you will die. And that wasn't that many years before. I was probably about 23. So I had enough time to see the large tree coming. And I could do nothing but pray. I was by myself. It was at night. And I hit the tree. My whole car was mangled. The whole car was mangled and twisted, except for my seat in the front. And it was straight. And all I had was a fractured sternum right here and a cut. And I just, if you are ever in danger or something, there's small things and some things are big things, but I'm alive today because the Lord answered that prayer. So thank you so much.
I have an aunt who I grew up with. She was real close to me. She didn't have any kids, and so we were kind of her kids growing up. And in New York, spirituality, church, Jesus is not as prevalent as it is down here in the South. It's very much popular to be going to church down here. Up there, it's not. And so she was not a Christian. And I, it's always kind of like, oh, you know, she'd come to our church plays, but she was never, she made it very known that she was not anything, did not want anything to do with Jesus. And so about 3 years ago, I really started praying for this, but it was more of a prayer that I was like, well, we'll see what happens. I guess I'll pray for it. We'll see what happens. And I'd always, she's in Florida now, and every time I went to Florida, I would just try to take her with me to church. I'd always make sure it was on a weekend. So that so like I could, maybe this time she'll come, maybe this time she'll come. And she came with me about 2 times, and every time she'd be like, oh, that's way too churchy for me. Huh. Okay, it's church. But anyway, so she just really still wasn't interested. And then she ended up moving out of the, she was in a over 60 manufactured home park. And she ended up moving out of there and ended up being kind of in a spot where she was really alone. She didn't really have the friends she had there. And she ended up moving right next door to a preacher. And the preacher asked her to go to church, she said no. And then finally, when we came to visit her this time, she's like, we're going to church and I know exactly which church we're going to. I was like, what? You're kidding. She's like, no. And so we went, and she still was like, she's like, I don't know, it's still church. And so I figured, I was like, I just didn't know what was going to happen. So I kept praying, and finally throughout that year, she had another friend come to her when she was really lonely. She just had another friend come to her and say, hey, why don't you come to church with me? And so then she just started going to church with that friend, and then she would text me and say, I'm going to church, and then she would be at Bible study like twice a week, and like all of a sudden she started like just really being involved, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is the last person you would imagine, the last person. She still hasn't really made it quite a decision yet, but I'm still praying for that. But still, like, she's interested, and she texts me and says she's praying for me, and it's just the last thing I could imagine. So that's my prayer, that God has definitely answered.